Hello, and welcome to the Best Pick Securities Market Brief. Today is Friday, June 19th, 2026, and we'll be covering the market wrap-up. Major index closing confirmed the 19th of June. Let's start with the closing figures for the major indices today. First, the KOSPI index. The KOSPI closed at 9,052.42 points, down 11.42 points from the previous day. That is a drop of, 3%. Next, the KOSDAQ index. The KOSDAQ closed at 966.59 points, dropping sharply by 34.34 points. That is a significant decrease of 3.43%. For context, the KOSPI did hit an intraday high in the 9,385 range, breaking its all-time high before plunging later in the session. Let's break down the main points. First, early in the session, the KOSPI surged all the way to the 9,385 level, hitting a historic high. This was driven by positive U.S. semiconductor news, specifically a rise in the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, combined with high expectations for a U.S.-Iran peace MOU. However, during the day, news broke that the MOU signing ceremony was suddenly postponed, and this coincided with supply and demand shifts from the FTSE rebalancing. As a result, the index plummeted by more than 500 points, ultimately flattening out to close in the 9,052 range. Second, the KOSDAQ plummeted by 3.43% due to simultaneous selling from both institutional and foreign investors. It ended up falling below the psychologically important 1,000-point mark once again, closing at 966.59, with 1,490 declining stocks. Third, regarding total market capitalization, it broke past 8,160 trillion won for the very first time during intraday trading. However, it gave up those gains and finished the day at 7,945 trillion won. Trading trends, as of the 19th of June close, moving on to the breakdown of trading trends by market participants. First, let's look at 2-to-1 KOSPI trading trends. By net purchasing value for each market player, retail investors registered a net buy of plus 1.6490 trillion won, standing alone to defend the index. Institutional investors registered a net sell of minus 1.2000 trillion won, focusing heavily on taking profits. Foreign investors registered a net sell of minus 300 billion won, reacting to the uncertainties surrounding the postponed MOU. Next we have KOSDAQ trading trends. Foreign investors flipped to net selling today. This is a complete reversal from yesterday's net buy of 32 billion won, reflecting their reaction to the MOU uncertainty. Institutional investors continued their net selling trend. Retail investors, on the other hand, tried to defend the support line by seeking bargain purchases in the KOSDAQ market as well. Sector and theme performance now. Let's dive into the details of sector and theme performance. First, let's look at strong sectors. The insurance sector gained plus 3.32%, led by gains in companies like Hanwha Life and Samsung Life. The financial sector rose plus 1.04%, with both banking and brokerage stocks showing strength across the board. Large-cap semiconductor stocks showed mixed performance. SK Hynix rose plus 2.94%, SK Square jumped plus 4.71%, and Samsung Electromechanics gained plus 3.18%. Meanwhile, Samsung Electronics dropped minus 2.34% due to profit-taking. Now, for weak sectors. In the bio and pharma sector, Alteogen, the number one stock by market cap on the KOSDAQ, dropped minus 4.33%, closing at 353,500 won. KOSDAQ semiconductor equipment, materials, and component stocks also saw broad declines. Yest fell minus 8.28%, PSK Holdings dropped minus 4.32%, Hana Micron declined minus 4.07%, and Eugene Technology dipped minus 3.79%. The Ecopro sister stocks were weak as well, with names like Ecopro BM recording losses in the 4% range. In the shipbuilding and heavy industries sector, HD Hyundai Heavy Industries dropped minus 2.49%. The defense and nuclear energy sectors were broadly weak as well. Despite the postponement of the U.S.-Iran peace MOU, The general trend toward easing geopolitical tensions remained intact, weighing down these stocks. Next, let's review major themes. First, there was a hyper-concentration of capital into mega-cap tech. SK Hynix and SK Square hit new all-time highs, while Samsung Electronics faced profit-taking, highlighting a clear divergence among individual stocks. Second, the FTSE rebalancing had a major impact. Passive funds shifted aggressively near the closing bell, which significantly amplified volatility. Third, insurance and financial stocks saw a spillover benefit. The inflow of expectations regarding a potential interest rate hike gave a strong boost to these financial names. Fourth, there was notable movement in aerospace and upcoming bio events. After the regular market closed, the biostock Antrogen showed strong gains, with the market focusing heavily on Japan's upcoming drug pricing decision scheduled for the 24th of June. New listings and IPO trends. Fourth up is our update on new listings and IPO trends. SpaceX has firmly settled into the top 5 by market cap on the NASDAQ since its listing back on the 12th of June, even overtaking Amazon. Because of this, discussions about its inclusion in the Mango's index are rapidly gaining traction. Over in Hong Kong, the IPO market is booming, with first-half capital fundraising skyrocketing by over 90%. Right now, 14 public offerings are underway, centered around semiconductor and AI companies. As for domestic KOSPI IPOs, because the KOSDAQ dropped below the 1,000-point line, it is anticipated that the screening standards for upcoming public listings will become significantly stricter. Meanwhile, the Financial Supervisory Service is maintaining its consumer warning of caution for the single-stock Samsung Hynix leverage ETNs. Investors need to remain alert, as maximum potential losses could reach up to 36.9%. Technical indicators and notable stocks. Fifth, let's take a look at technical indicators and notable stock updates. First, here is KOSPI technical trends. Today, the KOSPI broke its all-time record by hitting 9,385 intraday, but it then suffered a massive drop of around 500 points to close at 9,052. This created a historic, massive upper tail on the candlestick chart. Since the market has taken a hit from profit-taking after breaking all-time highs for 3 consecutive days, the key question going forward is whether the market is entering a phase to cool down from short-term overheating. Amid this highly volatile session with extreme intraday swings, an upside sidecar circuit breaker was actually triggered and then lifted. Ultimately, even though retail investors tried to defend the market with 1.6% 5 trillion won in net buying, the index reversed downward under the heavy weight of simultaneous institutional and foreign selling. Next is KOSDAQ technical trends. The KOSDAQ fell below the 1,000 line once again, closing at 966.59. Losing this psychological support level is a technical signal of market weakness. There were 1,490 declining stocks today. This widespread selling among small and mid-cap stocks happened because capital was pulled away and heavily concentrated into KOSPI large-cap tech. Moving on to 5 to 3. Stocks hitting new highs. SK Hynix rose 2.94% to close at 2,764,000 won, continuing its streak of breaking record highs. SK Square jumped plus 4.71% to hit 1,780,000 won, marking a new historic high. Samsung Electromechanics closed up plus 3.18%, driven by sustained market enthusiasm surrounding glass substrates. And finally, let's look at 5 to 4. Disparity and market sentiment overheating warnings. The KOSPI Volatility Index, the KOSPI, hovered around 89.9% relative to the previous day's close, showing that expected daily volatility has been pushed to the absolute extreme. Right now, half of all buying volume on the KOSPI is concentrated solely into just 2 stocks, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. This concentration into Sam-Jeon-Nyx has expanded 3 times over compared to last year, triggering serious overheating alarms. As retail investors continue to buy heavily into these leveraged ETNs, the Financial Supervisory Service's warnings remain firmly in place. Market indicators. Sixth, let's go over today's key market indicators. The KRW-USD exchange rate closed at 1,527. 1. This is down a slight 0.1 from yesterday's 1,527.11. And it appears to be the result of suspected foreign exchange authority intervention. The KRW 100 yen's exchange rate is at 946.391. This is a drop of 4.271, reflecting a strengthening yen. The U.S. benchmark interest rate stands at 3.50 to 3.75%. The Federal Open Market Committee held rates steady, with Kevin Warsh and the dot plot leaning hawkish. The U.S. 10-year Treasury yield is hovering around 4.49%. It has maintained its upward momentum following that hawkish Warsh FOMC meeting. The Bank of Japan's benchmark interest rate is at 1%. It has been exerting upward pressure on the yen ever since the rate hike back on the 16th of June. The domestic market capitalization stands at 7,945 trillion won. It did break past 8,160 trillion won intraday before pulling back. Customer deposits dropped slightly compared to last week, coming in at 115.6443 trillion won. Margin trading balances total 33.3076 trillion won. Broken down, the KOSPI accounts for 22.7 trillion won, and the KOSDAQ stands at 10.6 trillion won. To give you a bit more detail on the currency front, the KRW-USD rate actually neared 1,541 intraday on the news of the MOU postponement. However, it erased most of those gains after suspected government intervention capital stepped in, ultimately settling at 1,527 won. With the hawkish stance of the Warsh FOMC and the Bank of Japan raising interest rates, the prevailing view among domestic academics and market experts is that this high exchange rate in the 1,501 range will likely persist for the time being. Major news in-depth summary 7th. Let's dive into a more detailed summary of today's top news stories. Critical news. The U.S.-Iran peace MOU signing ceremony has been postponed, triggering a 500-point plunge in the KOSPI. The KOSPI started strong today, riding the tailwinds of a two-day rally in the U.S. Philadelphia Semiconductor Index. Right after the opening bell, it surged to the 9,385 level, breaking its all-time record. Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix also smashed their own records early on. However, the mood completely flipped during intraday trading when news hit that the U.S.-Iran peace MOU signing ceremony was suddenly put on hold. The White House announced that Vice President J.D. Vance postponed his trip to Switzerland, and the Wall Street Journal reported that the U.S. Vice President would not be attending the signing ceremony with Iran. As this wave of uncertainty hit, institutional and foreign investors rushed to lock in profits. This sent the KOSPI on an absolute rollercoaster, crashing 553 points from its intraday high of 9,385 down to a low of 8,831.72. Fortunately, retail investors stepped up with 1.65 trillion won in net buying to absorb the blow, allowing the index to recover and close flat at 9,052.42 points. KOSDAQ news. The KOSDAQ has fallen below the 1,000-point line again, with tech suppliers and bio stocks crashing across the board. Today, the KOSDAQ index lost 4.34 points, or 3.43%, closing at 966.59. This means it has once again surrendered its psychological support line of 1,000. The number of declining stocks reached a staggering 1,490. This steep drop is a direct result of capital being hyper-concentrated into KOSPI tech giants like SK Hynix and Samsung Electronics, leaving KOSDAQ's semiconductor equipment suppliers and growth stocks completely out in the cold. To give you some specific numbers, YEST plunged minus 8.28%. PSK Holdings dropped minus 4.32%. Hana Micron slid minus 4.07%. And Eugene Technology fell minus 3.79%. Even Altiogen, the largest stock on the KOSDAQ by market cap, tumbled minus 4.33%. Institutional analysts are warning that as long as capital remains heavily concentrated in large-cap KOSPI tech, the isolation of these small and mid-cap KOSDAQ stocks will likely worsen. Supply and demand news. The FTSE rebalancing collided with a Sam-Jeon-Nyx concentration that has grown 3 times larger in just 1 year. Another major factor behind today's KOSPI volatility was the FTSE quarterly rebalancing. Passive foreign capital shifted rapidly right before the closing bell, which severely amplified the swings in the index. Meanwhile, the Seoul Economic Daily reported that half of the total trading value on the KOSPI is now tied up in just two stocks, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. This extreme concentration has grown 3 times larger compared to this time last year. In response, the Financial Supervisory Service kept its consumer warning of caution active for single-stock leverage ETNs, urging retail investors to practice strict risk management. Samsung Electronics IR. Samsung Electronics has officially announced its 2026 Corporate Value Up Plan. Today, Samsung Electronics unveiled its Strategic Value Up Blueprint. The core takeaway is that the company is expanding its total investments this year by 21.7%, compared to last year's 90.4 trillion won. The strategy focuses heavily on boosting investments in HBM and next-generation DRAM to proactively meet the massive demand of the AI semiconductor supercycle. Spurred by this news, the stock broke its record high early in the session. However, it couldn't withstand the broader intraday market sell-off, and ultimately finished down -2.34% due to profit-taking. Here are a few other key headlines from today. The KRW-USD exchange rate neared the 1,541 level intraday due to the MOU postponement uncertainty, but it pulled back to close at 1,527 won following suspected intervention from foreign exchange authorities. Following the Kevin Warsh FOMC meeting, consensus among domestic academics and market watchers is growing that an exchange rate in the 1,501 range is here to stay for the foreseeable future. Reflecting the ultra-bullish outlook for the AI semiconductor industry, SK Hynix and SK Square both set new historic all-time highs today. In the biosector, Antrogen saw strong buying momentum after the regular market close, driven by high anticipation for its upcoming drug pricing decision in Japan scheduled for the 24th of June. Finally, looking at China, the country is reportedly pushing for IPOs of Changxin Memory Technologies and Yangtze Memory Technologies on its tech-heavy star market. This is raising concerns that global competition in the semiconductor supply chain is about to heat up significantly. Policy changes and international issues. 8th, let's summarize the major policy shifts and international issues influencing the markets. First, let's look at domestic policy. Regarding the Bank of Korea's monetary policy, there is growing speculation that the central bank might resume monetary tightening for the first time in about 3.5 years, factoring in the hawkish tone of the Warsh FOMC. The Financial Supervisory Service is keeping its consumer warning of caution active for the Samsung Hynix leverage ETNs, reminding investors to be highly careful. The foreign exchange authorities showed a strong commitment to currency stabilization, stepping in with suspected market interventions whenever the exchange rate approached the 1,541 mark. As for the FTSE rebalancing, while it is a regular quarterly event, it delivered a much heavier shock to the market today because it collided with an already highly volatile trading environment. Next are international issues. The biggest wildcard today was the postponement of the U.S.-Iran peace MOU. Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to Switzerland was canceled, which brought uncertainties regarding the nuclear negotiations right back to the forefront and rattled the markets. Over at the Fed, Kevin Warsh emphasized a hawkish tone, stating that fighting inflation is the absolute top priority. Because of this, the market's implied probability of a rate hike within this year is holding steady at around 49%. The Bank of Japan's 1% interest rate hike, back on the 16th of June, continues to push the yen stronger, causing the KRW JPY rate to slide down into the 946 won range. The Philadelphia Semiconductor Index extended its rally for a second straight day, which acted as a major catalyst that ignited the record-breaking rallies for SK Hynix and Samsung Electronics early in the day. SpaceX has successfully anchored itself in the top 5% by market cap on the Nasdaq, continuing to draw massive interest from Korean retail investors and putting the spotlight on the new Mangoes theme. Lastly, the upcoming release of the U.S. May PPI data will be critical in confirming whether inflation pressures are sustaining, which will likely sway global bond yields moving forward. Today's key summary to wrap things up. Let's run through a quick summary of today's market action. For market indices, the KOSPI closed flat at 9,052, down 0.13%, while the KOSDAQ tumbled 3.43% to close at 966.59, giving up the 1,000-point line. It was an absolute wild ride today, with the KOSPI touching a historic high of 9,385 before plunging over 500 points. For trading flows, retail investors bought a massive net 1.65 trillion won to defend the market. But institutional investors sold 1.2 trillion won, and foreign investors sold 300 billion won to lock in profits, worsening the market's capital concentration. For major issues, first, the sudden postponement of the US-Iran MOU signing and the cancellation of Vice President Vance's trip triggered the intraday crash. Second, the FTSE rebalancing added a sharp supply and demand shock. Third, growing anxiety over the hyperconcentration into Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix weighed on sentiment. For foreign exchange, the KRW-USD rate spiked close to 1,540 won intraday, but pulled back to finish at 1,527 won following suspected government intervention. For record highs, SK Hynix closed at 2,764,000 won, and SK Square reached 1,780,000 won, with both companies hitting new all-time highs simultaneously. For key risks, renewed uncertainty around the MOU negotiations, the breakdown of KOSDAQ 1000, overheating in leveraged ETNs, and the prolonged stay of the exchange rate in the 1,501 range are the main risks right now. For next week's watch list, keep a close eye on whether the US-Iran MOU talks can get back on track, Antrogen's drug pricing decision in Japan on the 24th of June, a potential KOSDAQ rebound, and whether the extreme concentration of capital into Sam-Jeon-Nyx will persist. Closing. Please remember that all final investment decisions are the sole responsibility of the investor. Thank you so much for watching.